Well, hi, everyone, and welcome on into another edition of Navigating Trump 2.0. This is the show that takes a look back at the week that was in Washington, D.C. through the lens of the second Trump administration. And joining me this week, once again, my good buddies, CBN News chief political analyst David Brody and host of CBN's Quick Start podcast, Dan Andros. Gentlemen, let's jump in with the big news here at the end of the week, and that, of course, is the fallout at the CDC as the director, Susan Monarez, was fired on Wednesday by President Trump, reportedly for conflicts with Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In a news conference that he held, or he was taking questions from reporters on Thursday in Texas, RFK Jr. said that the agency is in trouble. We need to fix it, and we are fixing it. It may be that some people should not be working there anymore. One of Monarez's attorneys asserted that Monarez was targeted because she refused to rubber stamp, quote, unscientific, reckless directives and fired dedicated health experts she chose, protecting the public over serving a political agenda. David, this is obviously reverberating throughout Washington, D.C., as well as in the medical community. There were a number of others high-ranking in the CDC who resigned in the wake of this firing. What are you hearing about it right now?
Well, that this is RFK's agenda. And it's specifically about vaccines, and you either get with the program or you get out. It's just that simple. And so this is an administration that has been breaking the norms, and this is yet another one. And so this idea that it's unscientific and all of that, well, I mean, that's up for debate. I mean, it just is, especially as it relates to COVID and a few others. And to be clear, RFK Jr. is not anti-vax. This idea that he's anti-vax is not true. I mean, he's okay with vaccines that have been tested for a very long time, for decades. But, this is the reverberation factor. And everybody, I wouldn't put this on Trump. I wouldn't put this on the Trump administration. I guess you would technically, because RFK Jr. is part of it. But this is an RFK Jr. situation for sure. There's no doubt about that. Remember, Trump still feels like he didn't get enough credit for the COVID vaccine. So he's really, I don't say against the base on this, but he's not tracking with the base on all. It's kind of like Epstein. It's the medical Epstein story with COVID, because Trump is like, oh, I did so great on the COVID vaccine. And there's a lot of MAGAs like, oh, yeah, we don't trust the COVID vaccine. So this idea that Trump is like this anti-vaxxer, that's just not true at all. I mean, he was one pushing it. The COVID vaccine. So that's what I have to say about that, as I think I'm Forrest Gump.
Yeah, we went Southern there for a second, David. I liked it, and we should incorporate that more into the podcast.
I have a box of chocolates, too.
Dan, it's interesting. She was confirmed by the Senate just 4 weeks ago. So I'm struggling to understand why, if, you would have thought that she would have had that any opposition she would have had to RFK Jr. and vaccines, that it would have either prevented her from being nominated or put forward for the job, or that she would have decided she couldn't work with RFK Jr. because none of what RFK Jr. is trying to do is a secret. But you had confirmation hearings. She was approved 4 weeks ago, and now all of a sudden she's fired. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, that is this sort of optics that Trump has escaped largely so far that he didn't the first time around, right? I remember the first administration, the Trump administration, it was, I hire the best people and I get them in. And then it was a revolving door of sorts in that first term. And then this second time around, he got a lot of praise for seeming to have a better plan, having the people that he wanted. And he's largely stuck to that. And so there's been some cohesion there, a lot more than in the first administration. So to see this one, it's kind of surprising, because that has not been the norm in this second term. And it looks like eerily reminiscent of what we saw more in the first term. And so you got to wonder what in the world happened behind the scenes here. Because as you said, absolutely, the things that RFK Jr. is pushing, he is not secret about these things. These are not surprises to people. So what was it that shifted? Because there are other people, sort of more of the bureaucrats that have been around in the CDC that another one just resigned with a viral post that they kind of got some flack for, one of the more flamboyant LGBT type people that quit and stuff. And, those are the sorts of people that you'd expect to be sort of resigning from the CDC or getting fired from the CDC because they clearly don't fit with, the sort of MAHA or MAGA movement. And so, yeah, this one, just from an optics standpoint, is definitely surprising. And I think there's probably more to the story.
And David, what Congress is going to do now will be very interesting about this, because you have the chairman of the Senate Health Committee, Republican Bill Cassidy. He was the deciding vote to confirm Secretary Kennedy a couple of months ago to his role as head of HHS. And then you also have Senator Susan Collins, who said she was alarmed by the firing. So how do you see Congress, how do you see specifically those two Republicans addressing this issue when they come back to town next week?
Well, they're going to want answers. They're going to want answers as to what in the world went wrong, and and how did this even happen to begin with? And so they're going to be skeptical. And I think the Trump administration is going to be in a tough pickle, and they're going to have to answer some serious questions.
And Dan, one of the things that Cassidy and Collins are calling for is there's a vaccine advisory group that is going to be meeting in a few weeks. And Kennedy has been putting some folks on this committee who, contrary to past members on this committee, are vaccine skeptics. So there's a lot of worry among Democrats and some moderates and some Republicans who don't feel the same way who don't have the same skepticism of vaccines that Kennedy does, that this vaccine committee will now have more voices on it that are going to be advocating perhaps against vaccines, and it's still unclear exactly what vaccines we're talking about here. So do you get the sense that there's a shift coming in the CDC on a vaccine commission? There's a lot of turmoil going on right now at the CDC.
Yeah, and I think, it'll be interesting to see where they land, because what I do think needs to change is not to say like you said, David, I don't think Kennedy, RFK, is necessarily anti-vax. I think some of the pushback, and a lot of the pushback that a lot of Americans have that are uncomfortable with, is basically that they were lied to on a few fronts during the whole COVID crisis and told things that weren't true. And, Fauci, they're telling us the good lie. Oh, just wear the mask. It'll stop the spread. And once you have the vaccine, it'll stop the spread. And then, we were just kidding about that. You get the vaccine and you can still be a host and spread it. You'll have lesser symptoms. So people were lied to, and there were no consequences to this. There definitely myocarditis in young, particularly young males. We're getting that at some of them. I think probably all of us know at least one or two people that have had something like that happen. And so even if that's a small percentage of the people that happen to, they kind of brush that off. So there's a massive distrust of the CDC out there amongst American people when it comes to vaccines, because they weren't upfront with us. They were not truthful with us fully the first time around. And so, something needs to happen, but it'll just be interesting to see where they land, because it's like we're saying, that doesn't mean all vaccines are bad, but you can't lie to American people when they're injecting things into their body.
Let's move on to Democrats and their position on Israel. And this week at the Democratic National Committee summer meeting, National Chairman Ken Martin announced that they would be putting together a task force to further debate the party's position on Israel. He said, "There's a divide in our party on this issue. This is a moment that calls for shared dialogue." He says, "I'm going to appoint a committee or a task force comprised of stakeholders on all sides of this to continue to have the conversation, to work through this and bring solutions back to our party." David, Democrats, we know there have been sharp disagreements about Israel, the war in Gaza, Israel's relationship with the United States. What do you make of this decision by the Democrats and the DNC to go ahead and put together a task force on their position on Israel?
What kind of task force do you need? It's ridiculous, okay? This is a bunch of gobbledygook. Yeah, there's a divide in the Democratic Party, but it's not a 50-50 split. This is a Democrat Party that is anti-Israel. That's it. It's pure and simple. And don't take my word for it. That's not analysis. That's facts. That's an actual fact. Poll after poll after poll shows Democrats, especially the younger Democrats, are fully all in for the Palestinians and anti-Israel. Many of them oppose the funding. A smaller percentage are more in the BDS category. So, you can have your task force, but it's going to mean nothing. What kind of solutions are you going to come up with? The solution they need to figure out is politically what they're going to do with a base that is anti-Israel. And you've got the leaders in your party that want to make sure that Israel isn't, that they don't just freeze money up for Israel and that there isn't any money flowing if they become in charge again. So I think that's really the consternation here. But this is a party that has left the train on, or left the station, excuse me, on Israel. We haven't even gotten into Republicans because they got problems too. But for Democrats, yeah, they got problems.
And Dan, I'll say it feels like there's a generational divide here among Democrats on Israel. You have the older generation of Democrats like Senator Chuck Schumer, who, and I know John Fetterman has been outspoken in support of Israel, that I think it's a lot different than some of the younger generation, the Generation Z, the millennials, who are making their way up through the ranks in Washington, D.C., not even necessarily lawmakers, but staffers and the like who are coming through and really helping to shape policy and what the Democrats' position is going to be on Israel moving forward. And obviously the war in Gaza has changed the game, right? I mean, people are feeling differently about Israel now than they did 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. For whatever reasons they might have. I just feel like there's a generational gap here thing, and it's not just Israel. It's a lot of issues where there's this gap in opinion on what to do about a certain issue. But Israel, I think it's a really acute thing.
Yeah, it is, because when we saw what happened on October 7th, it was like, how long are we going to, because we know in general, a large part of the left are not fans of Israel and will support Palestinian causes. And so you look at it and you think, how long is this going to last? And I don't think it took that long. I think it took a couple weeks before the protests started and people started, stepping out. And it's always been like this on campus. I think you have a lot of far left professors on campus that kind of push that agenda, the Palestinian agenda, the anti-Israel sort of agenda. And so then you see that kind of pour out on campuses when a lot of times they don't even really know what they're talking about, especially after October 7th, when we all saw the images and then people were still saying, oh no, it didn't really happen. You're just like, okay, what do you even do with that at this point? But Democrats are in a difficult place. And as David mentioned, the right now is starting to have to deal with this as well, because you have people like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson who have just been criticizing Israel and what they're doing in their response. And so I think both parties, more so the left, definitely have some figuring out to do, because the left can kind of see like, okay, obviously Israel was not to blame for October 7th, and that was horrible in those images. How do we navigate this? Because our base doesn't like Israel at all. So what do we do? So they're trying to navigate that. And I think it's going to be harder for them to navigate. But I do think, as David alluded to, there's going to be some reckoning to deal with on the right as well.
Well, let me just also quickly say that the far left thinks Israel is absolutely to blame for October 7th.
True. Yes.
I mean, so just to clarify that.
Yes.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I know the spirit of what you're saying, Dan.
Yeah,
for sure.
I want to talk about the Minneapolis shooting for a moment. I know this is kind of outside Washington, D.C., but obviously in the nation's capital, lawmakers, the White House is responding to it and reacting to it. And certainly on the cable news shows, a lot of which are based out of Washington, D.C., are reacting to it as well. For those of you not familiar with the story, on Wednesday morning, you had a shooter who fired on a group of school children who were attending a morning mass at a Catholic church in Minneapolis. 2 were killed. 17 others were injured. The 23-year-old shooter is a former student at the school whose mother formerly worked in the school office. That shooter apparently died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Obviously, we're finding out now the shooter put out a manifesto. This was a transgender person who did the shooting, and so that's being talked about quite a bit. Vice President Vance focused on the mental health aspect of the shooters. He said, we really do have, I think, a mental health crisis in the United States. We take way more psychiatric medication than any other nation on earth, and I think it's time for us to start asking some very hard questions about the root causes of this violence. And HHS Secretary Kennedy said he has the National Institutes of Health looking into links between violence and antidepressants that are regularly prescribed to millions of people in the United States. You also have Democrats and pundits, and I'm going to mention Jen Psaki, the former White House press secretary, on a was it a podcast or a TV show, or maybe it was just online. I don't remember exactly what it was, but she lashed out at conservatives offering thoughts and prayers for the victims, believing that those prayers are hollow if action on gun control measures aren't also pursued. So, Dan, I want to come your way with this first because we see this pretty much every time there's a mass shooting. You know, there's calls for gun control, an increase in gun control, with people offering thoughts and prayers. And, you know, I think that there is a sense by some like Jen Psaki that it's just talk, that's not you're not really, you know, praying for these kinds of things. But I know there's for most of the people listening and watching, probably all of you listening and watching, you know, praying for these things is an important issue for all of us who are Christians. So I wanted to get your thoughts on this.
Well, yeah. And I think this was a particularly horrific tweet by Jen Psaki because this shooting happened at a Christian institution. So you're sitting here telling a bunch of Christians not to pray, and then the ones who were victimized were Christians. So it's quite insensitive and quite tone deaf for her to say that after that shooting, that particular shooting at that location. But to what she's saying about, well, thoughts and prayers aren't enough. And I think the way she views thoughts and prayers, I would agree with her, because she probably views these prayers as everyone's just praying for all the bad stuff to stop. And we can't have any more bad things. And that's what people are praying for. And look, there's still bad things that happen. So clearly these prayers don't work. But what she's missing is that the reason you pray is to grow closer to God. And so what we as Christians are hoping more people do is turn to God, repent of their sins, and follow God with their whole heart. And the more people that do that, the less people you're going to have that are mentally disturbed and doing things like this. And so she has the exact wrong answer here, because more prayer and more thoughts and prayer is what is needed in the country on an individual basis, not just praying for something to stop, because there's always going to be evil in the world on this side of eternity. And so you can't just pray for everything to stop, because that's not what's going to happen. What you do want to pray for is people to have renewed hearts and renewed faith following Christ, instead of affirming people in mental illnesses. So when someone thinks there's something they're not, you're telling them, hey, that's obviously not real. Men can't get pregnant, men can get pregnant, that sort of thing. And they're cheering this on. And it's like, well, at some point when you're cheering on people who don't see reality for what it is, you are helping set the stage for people to go further down that road.
I have so much to say. And first of all, Dan, that was so eloquent and so well put. So I wholeheartedly agree with everything you had to say there. Let me do a disclaimer at the top. I know Jen Psaki. I like Jen Psaki. I'm friends with Jen Psaki. So I'll stop there with the disclaimer. And let me go a little further and say, I understand what she's saying here. I do. To what you said, Dan, and you kind of said part of this, and I just want to expand on that. I don't disagree with her about the thoughts and prayer stuff in this regard. I think a lot of people come and say, hey, my thoughts and prayers are with you. And it's just an aside. It's not really done. Are you really praying? Are you really praying for people? And I'm going to do a full disclosure here as well. A couple decades ago, I was one of those people. I was a Christian, and I would say, hey, I'll pray for you. And I never got around to it. Got a little busy, never did it. I don't do that anymore, but I used to. And I guarantee you there are people out there that do that all the time. Thoughts and prayers. And then they go to Netflix and eat Cheetos, and they're not doing a darn thing. And so I hear what she's saying, honestly. Now, theologically, she's off, and you talked about that, Dan. So that's a good point. But I get it. I do get it. I get the frustration. So there's that. But we should also understand with thoughts and prayers, I mean, why do we pray? I mean, God commands us to pray, Right. So we must pray because God commands us to do so. And I think of Psalm 146, in verses 1 through 3, where it talks about God is our refuge in our times, or excuse me, God is our strength in our time of refuge. And he talks about that he's a never-ending help in trouble. And so, this is what I think we should be praying for, among other things, but to have these families seek God and really draw closer to God through this. And so that's a good thing. That's a wonderful thing. There's a lot of other reasons for prayer too. Also, for anybody listening to this that wants to blame God for things like this that happen, and I understand why you would think like, why does God allow this to happen? Let's be clear. This wasn't God's fault, okay? It's our fault. And what do I mean by our fault? Go back to the garden, Adam and Eve. It started there. Right? I mean, it wasn't that God looked at the apple on the tree and said, I think I'll grab that. No, it was Eve, Adam and Eve, actually, together. And so when you look at it in those terms, we live in a fallen world. This is going to happen. So I just think those are some important points to make. And one last point to simply say, and you won't hear it on MSNBC and CNN, they will run away from this, but gender dysphoria is a mental illness. The DSM-5 categorized it as a mental illness, and now they've backed away from that. But it is a mental illness. And I want to be clear, I'm not here to rip anybody that has a mental illness. I have compassion for folks like that. Like people that are going through that, this is manufactured by folks out there that are confusing the kids. They're confusing them. And therefore, it is a mental illness. And I want to be clear, just because we say someone that is suffering with gender dysphoria or is transgender has a mental illness, I'm not trying to be mean about that. A lot of people are like, oh, they've got a mental illness and, look at them. They're a leper in society. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that get them help and it starts with Jesus. Get them help and it starts with Jesus. I want them to come to Christ. I want them to have a full life the way God intended it. We talk about how God knew you in the womb. He formed you in the womb. There is man and woman, male and female. Genesis said it right from the beginning of time. God said it just from the beginning of time in the book of Genesis. So I think that's important to understand. And as for gun control and mental illness, look, I think we need to address the mental illness aspect of this. I'm not quite sure how to do that specifically. I mean, yeah, we can come up with programs and money and all that. I'm not quite sure how much that's going to work. We live in a fallen world. And as for gun control, that's a larger discussion. I think there are liberals that want to take our Second Amendment rights away. That's low-hanging fruit. They've been wanting to do that for a long time. But what about universal background checks? What about some other things that are just common sense that would make sense? So, I think that discussion needs to be had. But that's some of my views on it.
Yeah, and I'll just add in. I think both of you are hitting a lot of things that are important here, and all of these things can be true at the same time. It can be that we have a mental health crisis here in America, but there's also a mental health crisis everywhere in the world because, like you said, we are fallen. We are now so online. We see that people are more depressed now than they've ever been. Young people are more depressed than they've ever been, and social media screens they warp. They warp our sense of reality. There's all kinds of reasons for the mental health crisis in America and around the world, and there's also gun control. And you're right, we could do an hour on a gun control thing, but I think that has to be addressed too because we have gun laws in America that are far less restrictive than most other countries in the world. And you can also be praying about all of these different things together and working with people. And I get why. I think, Jen Psaki and others, when they hear somebody say thoughts and prayers, David, you hit the nail on the head. It doesn't to them feel genuine, but they also want to know, okay, even if you are genuine about thoughts and prayers, that's great to commune with God and to be making sure this is how we communicate with God. We talk to him. We pray like a child. That's what God asks us, tells us how to pray. Pray like a child would pray. So that's part of this, but there's also action that's required on our part here on Earth because we do have free will. We do have the ability
that's right.
To do things, and some of that might be addressing mental health. Some of that might be restricting some gun rights that we have in America that are unhealthy for the country as a whole. So all of these different things can be true and happening at the same time, and everybody. If we get on the same page to be addressing all these different things, you can make an impact, but we're not there right now. All right, last thing, and we just have like a couple of minutes on this. I don't know if you guys were watching the entire cabinet meeting that took place. I think it was on Tuesday of this week. 3.5 hours. Trump and his cabinet members were speaking to members of the press. I really felt for the boom mic operators who are holding these things up. Like, the president even mentioned that, like, those guys are pretty strong. 3.5 hours of a cabinet meeting, and I got to say, I didn't hear a whole lot of meat being talked about in that cabinet meeting. It was off-putting to me as a viewer. It felt like overkill. It didn't seem like a good use of everyone in that room's very busy schedule and their time and American taxpayer dollars. It seemed ridiculous to me, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it. David, first, what did you make of this almost a half of a workday broadcast on television?
I absolutely loved it. I loved every minute of it. And I get it, right? Worship at the feet of Trump, right? Oh, Mr. Trump, you're the best. I understand what people are saying. All right, I get that. So there were there was tons of ego stroking, right? Okay, got it. All right, whatever. People, get over it. And I understand, John, to a degree, what you're saying, meat on the bone. I mean, I get, that's fine. I mean, they're not really having the frank conversations that you would think they would have without the cameras there. So to a degree, I get that. Having said that, the cameras were there, and that's why I loved it. The cameras were there, and the reporters were there, all of them. It wasn't just the pool. Everybody, come on in. And so I just love the fact that there's this transparency. And the reason I say that is that you say, John, not much meat on the bone, but there were the reporters. They could have asked lots of questions. They had access to all the cabinet members. I mean, how hard is it to get cabinet members typically in administration, especially all at once? You never get this opportunity. Well, there they are. Ask your questions. So you talk about meat on the bone. You could have meat on the bone if you get ready and ask some tough questions. And so, some of those questions were not tough, but one of them was about Taylor Swift and Kelsey. I mean, come on. So, I mean, they blew their opportunity. But you got to give Trump credit, right? I mean, you have to. I'm sorry. This is, people might rip him to say, oh, he just wanted the ego stroking in front of the camera. Okay, but he also allowed the reporters in the room, which means they could ask anything. He was not in control of that situation. You've got to give him credit. I personally think Netflix should do a mini series on this, like a limited series, kind of like called The Cabinet. And this could be season 2, episode 7. That's what I've decided. It should be called The Cabinet. And because this is term 2, it could be season 2. And this was 7th cabinet meeting he's had. So this could be episode 7 called Let It Rip. I mean, literally, you can make a lot of money that way, Dan. That's my view.
No, and I think, look, this is a stark contrast from the Biden administration, who, I mean, Biden
you mean where Jill
Jill
Biden was running the cabinet meeting? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it was just like you couldn't drag Joe Biden. I don't know where he was, off the beach, taking a nap, having some Werther's Original. I don't know what he was doing, but he was not doing any of these press conferences and meetings. So that is a good thing that he's willing to open the door to that and let people ask questions. He enjoys that. He enjoys sparring with the press. And so that's actually a good thing, regardless of how it ends up coming out. But then I will say, on the other hand, this meeting dragged on. For every person in America, I think I speak, that has been in a meeting that has dragged on too long, and then they haven't really not getting much done, but people are just wanting to say stuff.
Stop asking questions.
I know, like we got to go actually do the work here. Like we can't just sit in this room all day long. So I think everybody can sympathize with how frustrating that can be a little bit.
Yeah. Any final questions? No, don't put up your hand. Dave, what are you doing? It's one of those things. Yeah. All right, folks, we are going to leave it there for this week. But another pleasant exchange of ideas here on this edition of Navigating Trump 2.0. Hard stuff this week to talk about, but I'm really glad we're able to kind of work through a number of the different things that we had on our plate this week. Until next week, David, Brody, Dan Andros, thanks for being on Navigating Trump 2.0.
Thanks, John.
All right, John.